Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Shia City podcast where we answer questions from you guys. As per usual, we're here with
Sheikh Bilal.
last week on Instagram we sent out a reel asking people to submit anonymous questions. And now we're here to answer them. Are you ready to hear what the people have been asking?
Let's get to it.
All right. Salam. How can we distinguish whether a challenging situation is a test of our patience, a test with a future blessing, or a punishment?
Okay. So, first and foremost, to understand, this is a much longer conversation. We're going to introduce it in a short form to kind of concisely answer the question, but the concepts and the philosophy behind it can be very deep.
Yeah.
In short form, nothing that happens in this life is a punishment. Everything is a consequence of the decisions that we make. The consequence of the decisions that we make can be seen either as a test or a trial or a difficulty that we go through because of the decisions that we make. Allah reserves the punishment for the Day of Judgment, which is why there is a Day of Judgment and why Allah is just. Now, if this punishment was issued here, certain things can't be punished correctly. For example, you kill 1 million people, I can only kill you once in this life. But in the hereafter, you can suffer the punishment that's equivalent of taking the lives of so many people. Same way, saving people. If I save people, I can't really add much more to your life than give you a little bit of money for doing a good job. But in the hereafter, I can reward you properly. So that's why punishment and reward is something that Allah reserves for the hereafter. There are consequences to the decisions that we take in this life, some of them that are direct and one-to-one that we can see and understand, and some of those consequences are different. Let me give you an example. A one-to-one relationship in consequences, I drive my car too fast, I get into an accident. That action of driving too fast and an accident, the consequence ties and it makes sense and I understand it. But there are other actions which Allah says, for example, keeping family relations or silai rahim. The consequences of not keeping silai rahim is shortening your lifespan, is losing your rizq, is going through difficulties. That's not a punishment, that's a consequence. Now, I may not be able to tie exactly and say that, I disrespected my brother and my father, and now all of a sudden I don't have a job. It may not tie to me intellectually, but Allah has explained to us, and that's why He took the time to explain it, that if you do this, this is the consequence you'll suffer, not the punishment. Mm-hmm. The punishment is something that comes afterwards. So same way, in the example of our car, right? I drove too fast, I got into an accident. The accident is the consequence. The punishment is the ticket that the police give you on top of that. So hence, whenever we take a look at a difficulty in life, we want to look at a difficulty in life as a challenge that Allah is giving us to earn more. Now, that challenge to earn more in the hereafter is either something that Allah gives me the opportunity to earn more or comes upon me because of the consequence of the decisions that I've made. And then therefore I go through the difficulty. So hence, even if I don't do something wrong, there can be the opportunities and the difficulties that Allah places. Look at every difficulty you go through as an opportunity to get closer to Allah, not as a punishment. Because otherwise, then the Day of Judgment would have no purpose.
All right, let's go on to question number 2. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Bilal Hussain. My question is about niyaz and nazar. We do it on food. Why do we do it? And why do others believe it's bidah? Thank you.
Okay. Let's talk about what is nazar. Nazar is an oath that we take with Allah that if we achieve a particular goal that we have in mind, that we will fulfill this promise to Allah. A nazar is actually a very practical way that even the A.B.A.S used to perform to have when they wanted a hajat with Allah to have fulfilled. So what you do is in that situation, you make a nazar. I make an oath to Allah that if, for example, I pass my exams this year, I'm able to buy a house, Allah blesses me with a child, I will feed mu'mineen and believers. So then what do? I say, I can even add this element that I will feed believers for the sake of this person who is close to you that you love. For example, Imam Hussein, for example, Imam Ali, for example, Bibi Fatima, that, Allah, fulfill my oath by the wasila of Bibi Fatima, and I will feed people and give the barakat of this feeding to Sayyidah Fatima.
So would you say that increases your chance of getting your du'as answered?
It's using a wasila, it's using a connection to ask Allah. The same way that Allah has made a statement. Allah has given us an explanation that the Ahlul Bayt explained. And they said that whenever you make dua, begin your dua with salawat and end your dua with salawat. Do you know why? Because Allah answers your first prayer and He answers your third prayer, and Allah does not like that He should answer the first and third and not answer the one in the middle. So the wasila of Ahlul Bayt is something powerful. The first salawat that you send, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, Allah send peace and blessings upon Prophet Muhammad and his family. That's a dua. Then I ask for my needs. Allah, give me a Lamborghini. Then I say, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah send peace and blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad and his progeny. These two du'as on either side, Allah then looks at the second one and He says, I answered the first and the third. I don't like that I should be stingy in giving what someone asks me for, so let me give them a Lamborghini. Or maybe it'll be black and not red. But anyway, the significance of the point is that the intention of when we do nazar of, for example, say the Fatima, Imam Sadiq, Imam Hassan, is to say that, oh Allah, fulfill my desires by the wasila of this person that you love, who through their ibadat, their good deeds, their character, their status is close to you. Same thing in niyaz, right? Niyaz is the idea that, for example, that I want to send sawab, I want to send reward to someone. So I feed someone and I say the act of feeding this person has a special status in the eyes of Allah. And whatever the thawab of that is, I want to give to my marhumin. I want to give to, for example, the imam. I want to have a connection with Ahlul Bayt, and I want to do these good deeds so that they recognize me and acknowledge me. Hence, we pair these actions together and we bring them out to bring a positive consequence in our life. This is a good thing to do. You can do this with Quran, you can do this with salawat, you can do this with your ibadat. When we recite Salat al-Wahshat, Salat Hadiya Mayyat, when we recite du'as and we do it for our parents, we do it for our family, we recite Quran, and we do nazar of Quran to send to our relatives. These are all actions that we're doing with the intention of sharing the reward of the good deed that I'm doing with someone who's not here with me. Now, why would someone consider this to be a bid'ah? So a bid'ah refers to an innovation, and it's not an innovation. But what happens is that we have certain Muslimin who don't believe that you can take the wasila of anyone, who don't believe you can help anyone, who believe that you can't have a connection with anyone if you can't physically see them. We don't believe that. So anyone who disagrees with the first fundamental that you can connect with, support, help, have a relationship with someone who is not with you is going to disagree with you on this matter. And that's just the nature of it. The other thing is learning to be eloquent in what we're accomplishing and doing. We just say Nazar Imam Hassan, Nazar Imam Sadiq, and we don't explain what we actually mean. When we say Nazar Imam Sadiq, we say I've taken an oath to Allah by the wasila of Imam Sadiq to fulfill my needs and desires. If we say that, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing somebody can argue with us. But when we don't know how to be eloquent about what it is that we're doing, that's where we get into trouble.
Another question that is asked, what is the ruling behind cursing the Sahaba?
Okay. So the first thing that we have to understand is the word curse in English has multiple counterparts in Arabic, and that the translation is incomplete. We don't allow the cursing of Sahaba in the terms of the Arabic word of sub, which is to use foul language. Allah has forbidden this. Allah in the Quran, for example, gives the explanation in Surah An'am, verse number 108. وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Allah makes a statement and says, do not abuse those who they call upon besides Allah, or they will abuse Allah in revenge without knowledge. This statement takes sob, which in this verse is translated as abuse, but in English we translate it as curse, using foul language. Allah is forbidding the use of foul language for anyone that they worship or anyone that they follow. The idea of Allah making the statement that do not curse that they worship other than Allah is to demonstrate that if you can't curse those that they worship other than Allah, you can't curse anyone less than that either. So the use of foul language, Allah has forbidden in the Quran. The problem is, and why people make mistakes and they assume that there's some kind of permissibility in this, is because curse can be used for using foul language, and it can be used for what in Arabic is called la'an. La'an refers to a dua that a person makes, which essentially says that, oh Allah, remove your mercy from this human being. What it implies is that two people that exist, on the day of judgment, when they stand before Allah, you want to be with the people who Allah loves and not with the people that Allah hates. And what I've done is I've seen in the character of this person attributes that Allah hates. So Allah, keep me and him separate. Separate him from your mercy and keep me in your mercy. This is the comment that's made. And this is a dua that isn't a public dua, right? This is a dua that's a personal dua that I make between me and Allah, because it's about me and my conclusion, who I'll be as a person, and who I see as a character that doesn't reflect the values that Allah wants to have in this world, that Allah is unhappy with, right? So for example, you come to the conclusion and you say that Fatima bad'atun minni, yaghdab Allahu bi ghadabiha wa yafrah Allahu bi farhiha. Or Allah is upset with the one who upsets Fatima, and Allah is happy with the one that pleases Fatima. If there exists such a person that has violated the rights of Bibi Fatima and has abused her, and Allah will be upset with him, I don't want to be in the same camp as that person. So what am I doing? I'm making a dua that says, oh Allah, I've seen something that you dislike, keep me separate from it. Is that a public dua? Is that intended for people? Or is it that when I do it publicly, it turns into sub and it turns into foul language and abusive behavior? So Islam has never allowed it. Islam has always said that if it's abusive, you're not allowed to do it. But to make a dua, Allah Himself sends la'an on people in the Quran. Allah Himself says that the mu'mineen will send la'an on people. So sending la'an is not that we go out there and we say, la'anatullah, 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 la'anatullah. No. Because then at that point in time, it's changed its meaning to cursing, which Allah has forbidden, because it's abusive, it's harsh, it's hurtful for people. But me personally, to have an opinion that there exist on this earth people Allah loves, and I want to be with them, and people that Allah hates, I don't want to be with them. And that I make Allah clear that, oh Allah, if my character for any reason doesn't clarify who I am, here's my dua to show you who I am and what I want. That's the actual reality of what's going on. But if someone takes that and makes it abusive, that's not allowed. That's never been allowed. And that's where the conflict comes in, is that someone who doesn't understand the terms and only looks at it in the English language gets confused by the idea that, oh, well, in some places you're supposed to curse, some places, what's the reality? No, the reality is the word curse is a very limited word. And the reality behind it and the translation behind it and the truth behind it in Arabic comes to different terminology with different rules and regulations. And we have to be conscious and careful, because the true law came in Arabic. We have to know the actual essence of what we're saying and why we're saying it. And then we won't make these mistakes that make us criticized for having bad opinions about people.
Keep a clean mouth, folks. I've heard men should not get their ears pierced, but it's a commonplace now to see a Shia man wearing earrings. Is this permissible?
Okay. The rule is that men should not dress in a feminine manner. If there is a certain attribute in the culture and the country that you live in that is described as being a woman's characteristic or a woman's attribute, for a man to display that is haram. Same way, for example, a man to wear women's clothing is not allowed in the religion of Islam, or a woman to entirely dress as a man that's completely uniquely for a man is not permissible. Now, what's happened is many items of dress and clothing have become unisex, that they're appropriate and socially and culturally acceptable within our country for men and women to wear. That's not the stuff we're talking about. When it comes to the idea of earrings, if the social norm is that this is only something that is possessed by women, then it should not be worn by men. But if, for example, the social norm of that culture is the urf, as it's called in Arabic, is that it can be something that can be worn by men or women, then it's permissible. Now, the concept of why you wear Shia men wear it now is that historically there are some narrations, some ahadith that describe and say that in the children of A.B.A.S, it would be appropriate, that both men and women had their ears pierced, and that in some books, in old books, in the Sirah books, it says that some of the attributes of people who associate themselves with Ahlul Bayt would have this action done of ears pierced. So what people want to do is revive those traditions and revive those cultures, but what they don't understand is if that's the urf of that time, that means it was appropriate for that culture in that location. It may or may not necessarily fit in here. If we find that this attribute of keeping both ears pierced is considered feminine and it's a right of a woman and it's inappropriate for men in this culture to do it, then inshallah, it's not jais. But it's not my job to tell you what the urf is. It's your job to determine what's appropriate, what's respectable, what's dignified in your culture, and what is a reflection of the attributes of a man, and was the attributes reflective of a woman. And that can literally change from town to city to age, by person, and environment. That what's appropriate in a culture. Something that's good in New York could be considered bad in Ohio.
Yeah, but the thing is, living in America, it's a melting pot.
This is
You'll
why
see a man wearing a skirt down the street, and it could be the norm.
So this is, again, why Islam points it to the concept of urf, and it's the individual's responsibility to make sure that they follow what's the appropriate guideline, and to remember that to be a lover of Ahlul Bayt means that you should be the best of a society. And then that's on you to make that distinction of how to fulfill that responsibility.
So in essence, just like you.
So even, for example, the dress of A.B.A.S is a reflection of the responsibility we put on ourselves to be able to answer and to support the community in terms of their religious needs. In the absence of that, should everybody dress like this? Is it appropriate for the society and the culture that we live in? Maybe not. Maybe it would be more respectable if we walked around, well-dressed, business casual. Or, for example, that in the appropriate environment, we dress appropriately and we make it look right. That's our obligation.
Does a woman who missed fast due to past pregnancies years ago have to pay Fidia every year if she hasn't made them up yet?
So, okay, let's explain the terms first so that everybody can appreciate the question.
Because I'll be honest, I don't know what Fidia means.
Okay. So Allah in the Quran, where He says fast in the month of Ramadan, He says if you're sick or traveling, then appoint other days or pay a fidya if you haven't been able to make up that fast in the amount of time. A fidya refers to 750 grams of food that is given for every day that's missed of fasting that you were unable to perform, and you didn't make up the qadha in 1 year from that month of Ramadan. So, as an example, a lady's expecting, or a man is sick, and they can't fast. When the month of Ramadan ends, they have 1 year in time where they can make up the qadha and give the expired fast that they missed and make it up. If it happens that the year comes to a close and next Ramadan comes and I didn't make up my fasts, I now have an obligation to pay fidya, which essentially means that I had a fast in the month of Ramadan. I didn't perform it. I was obligated to complete that fast. I didn't complete it. So now I'm paying an amount of money in compensation for the fact that I missed that fast.
Okay.
That has to be paid just once. And then I have the rest of my life to make up that fast.
That singular day or the 30?
That just one time for that one fast. So every fast will have a fidya that has to be paid. So for every fast that I missed and I didn't make up in a year, I have to give 750 grams of food as a penalty for not making it up in the year.
Okay.
But I only have to do that once. I don't have to do it every year. So her question is that I didn't do it the first year. I paid a fidya. The next year came, I still wasn't able to make up that fast. Do I have to pay the fidya again? Do I have to give 750 grams again because 2 years ago I didn't keep a fast? No, you only have to do it once, but the qadha remains. You still have to make up that fast some point in time in your life.
How much is 750 grams of food?
It's, a kilo less a quarter. But
not
what that means,
how much
like,
would it
if
cost?
financially speaking, it equals to about $2 to $3 a day. It can be up to $5 a day. But it's generally about $2 to $3 a day. But when you pay it, you can't just hand someone $2 or $3 and say, here you go, here's the fidya. You actually have to give them the food. So what we do is we find organizations that have the capability to go out and give the amount of food that's required on our behalf, and we give them the responsibility to execute. We give them, for example, a representation that they go out and they fulfill this, and they actually have to fulfill it by food. So when you give fidya, living in America, if I can't physically find poor mu'mineen that are deserving of this amount of food and go give them the food myself, I can appoint a representative in Pakistan, in India, in Iraq, in Yemen, Lebanon, and other places where they can do this for me. But I have to tell them that it's fidya. And they have to make sure that it's done in the form of food, not in the form of money.
Got it. All right, on to the next question.
Let's do it.
More of a personal question.
Okay.
Someone asked, I'm in love with a Sunni person and I don't know what to do. He is perfect for me and he said he will look into Shia Islam. Is it haram to marry him? Please help. Yeah.
So you've already done all of the haram things by this point in time. Look, the engaging between mahram and non-mahram is not allowed. The building an emotional connection with someone who you don't have a relationship with is not the way Islam works in terms of finding a life partner, and that's not how Islam recommends finding a marriageable partner. Is it haram to marry someone of Ahl Sunnah? No, they're Muslims. You can't. That's not a problem. But the idea of building an emotional connection with an individual who isn't mahram to you before the time of marriage is problematic. You've already done the bad part. The reality is getting married to someone who you're allowed to marry someone who says La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. But one, you shouldn't be building these emotional connections before marriage. That's not how Allah wants it. This is why Allah, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا عَلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Allah first in this ayah describes and He says that I gave you marriage and then I put love and mercy in your hearts. Love and mercy comes after marriage. The love that comes before marriage isn't true love. It's self-love. Because it's all about how I feel and what I want and what I need and what I can and can't have. True love is that selfless love. It's about caring for the other person. That's our partner that shares with us, that works with us. And true love is about what I can do for you, not what you can do for me. So this idea of building these relationships is really self-love more than anything else. Shar'an, it's not haram. But there are consequences to decisions like this. There's consequences to going through this process and building these connections before marriage. And that's already been done. So, but to get married? No, there's nothing wrong with that.
So in your opinion, what's the best way to find a wife or husband in this American day and age?
Tune in to our next podcast. It's not a 2 minute answer.
It's not.
It's a long conversation of talking about, and that's it. Talking about marriage doesn't begin when you're, ready to find a spouse. It
Yeah.
begins when you're starting to build that image in your mind of who should your spouse be.
Mhm.
And talking to young adults about what characteristics you want your spouse to be, what kind of a person do you want to be, the same way that you talk to a child and you ask them, who do you want to be when you grow up? A fair question to ask is, what kind of a person do you want to marry?
Yeah.
A child, as they grow up, will initially look at attributes and qualities that they like in their parents, will look at qualities that they like in their grandparents, their aunts, their relatives. But an adult will look at qualities that they see in media. They will look at qualities that they see on Instagram. They will look at qualities that they see in movies and make a decision on who they want to be with in their life.
Yeah.
So that's it. That conversation begins a lot earlier to talk about it. So even this idea of marrying a Sunni person, right? It's the same thing that you're going to go through certain difficulties in life because you choose someone who isn't similar to you. You have to be mentally prepared that you want to take that on.
Makes sense. Here's another question. What's
Let's
the
go.
concept behind Tarawih?
Okay. Taraweeh is a mustahab prayer. And it's essentially taking Salat al-Layl, and the second Khalifa converted into a separate entity and made it something that's recommended to do in Jamaat. And it was the second Khalifa who instituted this concept of Taraweeh. Within itself, as a mustahab prayer, you can pray it. But as all mustahab prayers, you can't pray it in Jamaat.
Mhm.
Istisqa is the only exception to this, that you pray in Jamaat. Other than that, and that's asking for rain. Other than that, any mustahab prayer, you pray alone. You want to pray Taraweeh, do it yourself. But to go into a masjid and do it, that's bid'ah. That was created by the second Khalifa.
Here's another question. Why are there trimester-specific stipulations for women regarding fasting, and does not fasting in the correct trimester in the past put me in trouble now?
There is no restriction that I have seen from any of our maraja based upon trimester. It's essentially the restrictions are based upon haraj. If it's difficult for you to perform a fast in the aspect of expecting a child, it's not wajib to fast in that condition, and you can make up that fast at a later point in time. So there is no restriction on trimester. If in the past you've skipped fasts because it's difficult for you to fast in a state of pregnancy, there's nothing wrong with that.
Here's another question relating to fasting. Can I fast while traveling to my sister's house who lives about 150 miles away?
Especially when you're traveling to their house, no, unless if you leave after Salat al-Dhuhr, and your sister's house is not your house. So if you intend to stay there for 10 days in that city, then you can fast. Otherwise, you can't fast in her house. You can only fast in your house or a house where you've established your home base as.
So someone asked relating to food. According to Ayatollah Sistani, can we take supplements which contain gelatin?
Okay. Gelatin, so there's a few ways of understanding this. One, if gelatin is derived from animal sources and we don't know what those animal sources are, then gelatin is not permissible for us to consume.
Mhm.
But if gelatin can be derived from artificial sources and we don't know if that gelatin is derived from an artificial source or an animal source, then it can be permissible because we don't know if it's najis or not. Well, once I know, and majority of gelatin today, as far as I know, is derived from animal sources. Living in America, a product made in America, not made in a Muslim country, if it possesses gelatin in it, that product is then najis because it contains animal byproducts that are not halal. Can you consume something that has a non-halal animal byproduct in it? The rule that Sayyid Sistani has established, if 2% or less of the product is made from something that's najis or impure, it can be consumable because that najasat is lost in the process of making this item. So in that sense, if it's something that's 2% or less and there's gelatin, it's possible. Generally speaking, you won't find that as a condition.
Yeah.
If we come to the day and time where there's artificial gelatin versus natural gelatin, the way it's now happened with lecithin. Lecithin used to be an animal byproduct, but now it can be made by soy, and majority of lecithin is made by soy because it's cheaper than animal byproducts. And which is why now lecithin is not something that's considered to be a najis or inappropriate product.
Yeah. Because there is fish gelatin.
Even fish gelatin is something that's questionable. Does the fish
Really?
that it originates from have scales or not?
Oh, yeah.
So that's something you have to kind of look into and kind of do your own research to come to the conclusion if it's permissible, quantity that's present in it,
Mhm.
where does it come from, and figure out how to process it.
Got it. Okay, so forgive me. I'll be honest. I don't know how to pronounce this, and I don't even know what this is.
Okay.
Is gochujang and mirin haram? There is mirin in sushi rice. Should it be avoided? I was told certain percentage of alcohol in cooking is allowed. So it's like three questions in one.
So what's a gochujang first? Let's take a look at that. Okay. So gochujang
Yeah.
is a fermented condiment popular in Korean cooking and is made from chili powder, fermented soybean powder, barley malt powder, and salt. Okay, looking at the
Yummy.
contents of this,
Yeah.
right? Um, barley and malt products are things that are احتياط وجوبا to be avoided. So we would say that we want to avoid it unless if it's less than 2% of the quantity that's in there. Again, fermented things that are pickled can be permissible as they don't ferment to the point where they become alcoholic. And if there's alcohol in there, then it would not be permissible. Mirin as well, too, I think, is a rice wine,
Okay.
similar to sake, but it has more sugar and a lower alcohol content, 14% to be precise. So cooking with alcohol, the only time any alcohol is permissible is where it's less than 2% of ingredients by quantity, such that it's lost in the process of making it, cooking or preparing an ingredient. Alcohol in general in cooking is not something we want to use because even though they say that it's burned off, you burn off the excess. Food itself is porous, it absorbs alcohol. The goal when someone cooks with alcohol is that the food should absorb the alcohol and the excess is burned off. Once that food absorbs alcohol, it's now become najis for the presence of alcohol. The only exception again is where it's less than 2%. So if these items are present in less than 2%, which generally speaking they're not, we want to avoid it. Now, rice for sushi can be prepared two ways. One is using a rice wine or a wine or alcohol or sake, and the other is using vinegar. Majority of supermarkets or simple places, inexpensive places will make their sushi with using vinegar because it's a much cheaper ingredient. If the place uses wine to make their rice sticky or they use alcohol to make their rice sticky, that's something we want to avoid, and that's a place we wouldn't buy these things from. When it comes to gochujang, assuming that's how you pronounce it, the fact that it's a barley and malt product included in there, احتياط وجوبا, if that's how it's utilized or if that's what it is, then that's something we want to avoid and not use.
Got it. So this is another personal question.
Okay.
Salam Sheikh. If my partner who is half Sunni and half Sikh converts to Shia Islam for marriage, will our marriage be valid?
You can marry a Muslim. There's nothing wrong with that. And a person who proclaims Islam, that's on between them and Allah. And if they're willing to learn about and follow Islam, then whatever they were, they were. This was the truth in the time of the Prophet, where people converted from polytheism to Islam and they were married and they lived lives. And it remains till this day that whoever wants to come to Islam and professes their faith shall be deemed a Muslim and treated with Islam. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. So this is a two-parter question. Are the prophets and or imams that have been martyred in the name of Allah alive or dead?
Okay, so for that, we can just go simply to the Quran where Allah says many times, but specifically in Surah Al Imran, verse number 169. وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. Allah says, and do not think of those who are killed in the way of Allah to be dead. Nay, they are alive, being provided sustenance with their Lord. So simply on the basis of Quran, someone who dies at the death of a shaheed may be physically missing from the world around us, but Allah says, don't call them dead. They're alive, and I'm the one who is sustaining them and giving them their life, and that they're alive at that point in time. So imams who go through shahada, people who sacrifice their way for the sake of Islam, they're considered alive.
So the second part was, when Rasulullah died, is he considered dead or alive when he was buried?
So this is an interesting question in the sense that, for example, what's the status of the Holy Prophet?
Yeah.
To answer this, look at it very simply that what we see the Aimma explain is say that anyone who is a mu'min and a true Shia, when they die, even if they die on their bed, they die the death of a shaheed. So if the Shia of Rasulullah dying on his bed is considered to be a shaheed and thus therefore alive and receiving his sustenance from Allah, then the one he is the Shia of, how can they be dead? Meaning that their submission to the truth, they are the source of truth that everybody else follows. So hence, taking the wasila of Ahlul Bayt, sending salam to them, respecting them, asking Allah for assistance through them is the same way as me asking someone who's alive today, because Allah has described and said, one who dies in the way of Allah, don't call them dead. Rather, they are alive, but you do not perceive.